Imagine sitting in a pitch-black cabin, miles from civilization, with no phone, no contact, and only your thoughts for company. But the moment the silence settles in, you realize something that stops you cold. You are not alone. There was a voice. Your voice. Talking, commenting, judging, narrating every single thing you did. And here's what nobody ever asks: whose voice is that, exactly? Because if you're the one listening, then who's doing the talking? This is where solitude starts to collapse. Most people assume solitude means the absence of others. You close the door, you turn off the notifications, you breathe. And for a moment, it feels clean, spacious, like finally being yourself. But then something strange happens. The room fills up anyway, not with people, with voices that used to be people. Psychologists have a term for this, though they rarely discuss it in public. It's called internalized others. The idea is almost too simple to sound disturbing. Every person you've ever spent meaningful time with, every parent, every teacher, every lover who left, every friend who stayed too long, they didn't just leave impressions on you. They moved in permanently. They became part of the architecture of your inner voice. So when you sit alone and you think you're finally free from the world, you're actually sitting in a crowded room of ghosts. And this is where it gets disturbing, because you've never actually been able to hear your own thoughts in pure, uncontaminated form. Not once. Every belief you hold, every judgment you make about yourself in the dark, every whispered cruelty you tell yourself at 2 a.m., it's borrowed. It came from someone else first. You just forgot to return it. Now pause and let that land. The voice telling you that you're not good enough, that's not yours. The voice saying you talk too much, take up too much space, want too much, also not yours. You inherited those. And somewhere along the way, they became so familiar that you mistook them for truth. But here's the paradox that makes this stranger. If all your inner voices are inherited, then the self that experiences solitude isn't really a single self at all. It's a committee, a noisy, contradicting, deeply opinionated committee that never agreed to meet, never voted on leadership, and never stops talking. And you, the one reading this right now, you're somehow sitting in the middle of all of them, convinced that you're alone. You've never been alone, not even close. Now, here's what science says, and almost nobody talks about this part. Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky discovered that the voice inside your head, the one you think of as your thoughts, originally existed outside you. It was the voice of a caregiver, speaking out loud, guiding, scolding, praising. And then, slowly, your developing brain pulled that voice inward, swallowed it, made it yours. What you call thinking is actually a form of internalized speech. You're having a conversation that started before you were old enough to choose who you were talking to. And that's terrifying, because it means the most intimate place you have, the inside of your own mind, was colonized before you could consent. But then something strange happens when you hold that thought long enough. It stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like something else entirely. Because here's the part that genuinely unsettles people. If we are assembled from others, if our inner world is really a collage of voices and relationships and moments that pass through us, then what exactly is being protected when we seek solitude? What self are we trying to preserve? Go deeper. Neuroscience shows that the brain's default mode network, the system that activates when you're daydreaming, resting, just being, doesn't go quiet in solitude. It gets louder. It runs simulations. It replays conversations. It imagines future ones. It populates the empty space with everyone you've ever known. The brain, it seems, is allergic to true aloneness. It will manufacture companionship out of memory and imagination rather than sit with silence. Which raises something uncomfortable. What if the need for solitude isn't a desire to be alone? What if it's actually a desire to choose which voices you want to hear? Not escape from others, but a kind of curation. You're not running from people. You're running from specific people, specific pressures, specific versions of yourself that only exist in their presence, and that reframe changes everything. Because suddenly solitude isn't a retreat from the world. It's a negotiation with it. It's you, sitting quietly, deciding which parts of the world you're willing to carry and which parts you need to set down for a while. But you're never setting it all down. The room never empties. Now here's where this becomes deeply personal. We are living in the most paradoxical era of loneliness in human history. People report feeling more alone than any previous generation on record, and yet we are more connected than any humans who have ever lived. Every moment in your pocket, thousands of voices, thousands of opinions, thousands of faces performing versions of themselves for your consumption. And something is happening to us that we don't have good language for yet. The internalized others are multiplying. You're not just carrying the voices of people who loved you or hurt you, you're now carrying the voices of strangers. Influencers whose aesthetic you absorbed at 11 p.m. Commenters you'll never meet. Public intellectuals whose confidence reshaped how you think. Algorithms that learned which version of you clicks more, and then quietly began feeding that version back to you like a mirror that only shows one face. You go looking for yourself in solitude. And you find a crowd. And this is where the horror sharpens into something almost philosophical. Because here's the question nobody in psychology or philosophy has fully answered: if the self is assembled from others, if there's no clean interior self beneath all the voices, then what exactly is doing the assembling? Something is choosing, filtering, holding some voices closer and pushing others away. Something is reading this right now and feeling that strange mix of recognition and unease. What is that? Some philosophers call it the witness. The part of consciousness that observes the committee without being fully captured by it. It's not a thought. It's not a voice. It's the quiet behind the voices. The space the committee argues inside of. And here's the haunting part. You felt it. You felt it in those rare moments when the noise dropped, when you sat somewhere beautiful or terrifying or deeply still, and for just a second, the committee went silent and something remained. That something, that thin, wordless, present thing that might be the closest you've ever gotten to actual solitude. Not the absence of others, but the presence of something that exists before the voices start. But you can't live there. You can't sustain it. The committee always reconvenes, and maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe that's what being human actually is. A temporary arrangement of borrowed voices, held together by something we don't have a name for, trying to remember what it felt like before the world moved in. Here's what I want you to sit with. The next time you seek solitude, the next time you close the door and breathe and think you've finally escaped, listen. Not to the silence. Listen inside the silence. Notice who's there. Notice whose voice that is, telling you whether the quiet is peaceful or unbearable. Notice whether the solitude feels like freedom or like a room you're not sure you're allowed to be in. Because the loneliest thing a person can discover, the thing that no one warns you about, is that you can be completely alone, door shut, world gone, and still feel like you're performing, still feel watched, still feel the weight of everyone who ever decided who you should be. That's not solitude. That's just a different kind of crowd. And if you've ever felt that, if you've ever sat in the silence and still felt watched, then you already know what this video is really about. It's not about solitude. It was never about solitude. It's about whether there's a you, underneath everything, that exists independent of the world that made you. It's about whether the self is something you discover or something you construct. It's about whether the voice you trust most in the dark is actually yours, or just the most familiar stranger you've ever met. We keep seeking solitude because we believe, somewhere deep down, that if we get quiet enough, we'll finally hear something true, something original, something that belongs only to us. But what if that's the oldest illusion of all? What if the self that's listening was listening to others long before it was ever listening to itself? And the silence isn't empty. It never was. It's just full of everything you forgot you were carrying.